Hello, this is a presentation of my analysis of TSM versus GGS in the second round of the losers bracket during the 2020 LCS Summer Playoffs. The way I have this set up is I am reading from a script and I will be providing relevant footage on screen. My target for this video is about 15 minutes once I actually begin, and I would prefer to make it relatively concise. Attached to this email will be both the script and this video. I will segment this video into 3 sections around 5 to 8 minutes each to talk over different stages of the game. I will be analyzing both teams this game, and I'll be doing my best to pick up on mistakes from both teams and how the other team could do better in exploiting them. And I will begin with draft phase. Stylistically at this point, TSM throughout playoffs preferred to play compositions that either played one lane or two lanes late game, whereas Golden Guardians were unique in the regard that they were much more variable. They were one of the only teams that were relatively effective at playing 3 lanes, but they were also capable of playing 2 lanes or even 1 lane. This flexibility made them quite unpredictable in draft. The biggest issue I see in this draft is Golden Guardians blind picking Haunser's Mordekaiser on R3. I thought this was a massive mistake. While later on in the game, Mordekaiser does quite well into Azir during the teamfight phase, as he can destroy the Azir soldiers with his ultimate, he's blind picking the champion into a player who's shown much comfort on a variety of hard counters to the champion. GGS choose to ban Ornn since their composition is already relatively low damage with Senna, so TSM can stack engage versus anything high damage that Damonte picks, and they ban GP since he is a champion that can deal with Mordekaiser in the late game side lane. Unfortunately, it's a little bit too little too late. Gangplank, Jax, Camille, Fiora are all champions that can deal with Mordekaiser in the late game side lane, and TSM choose to answer with Jax, since out of all of these, it's the most oppressive in lane out of all of the available options. Additionally, picking Mordekaiser this early breaks the Volibear flex, which decreases the fluidity in Golden Guardian's draft. Furthermore, the Echo they choose after the banning phase is not a good answer into Azir. He is a champion that's heavily punished by freezes. He is a champion that struggles to break freezes since his Q is hard to control and costs a lot of mana. And Jax also then counters both of these champions in the side lane while only having to build one type of resistance. I would have preferred to see GGS pick something like Ziggs on 3, ban Renekton and maybe Jax, and then pick Camille on R4. Ziggs is good against Azir in the laning phase, and he does well against Azir in teamfights. He synergizes well with Camille, and while TSM will likely just flex set top, which is favorable into Camille, GGS can just play 2 lanes, and Camille is flexible enough where even if she loses the side lane, Camille also has good teamfight options, which is a big reason why we saw her pick so much at Worlds, especially early. Furthermore, the 3 champions already locked in for TSM struggle to play against champions who can effectively play with range, like Ziggs. Other options on my mind, if Golden Guardians wants to maintain the support counter pick, are Gangplank and Renekton if Haunser isn't comfortable playing Camille. They're each quite favorable into set, and are versatile enough to side lane if GGS wants to go that route. They each synergize well with both Ziggs and Senna too. Renekton in particular guarantees top priority into most matchups early game, and if Gangplank gets a poor lane, he scales extremely well and always has the option to side lane. The only real weakness I can see for picking Ziggs early is TSM is capable of stacking engage and trying to force through one lane, but GGS holds support counterpick and is capable of pivoting into a Tahm Kench on 5, which offers them increased effectiveness in playing multiple lanes, and gives them a disengage option if TSM tries to stack engage onto the Ziggs. The one last thing I want to cover is TSM showed their hand of picking Ashe early by banning Olaf. I would have liked to see GGS take Ashe away from TSM once TSM locked in set on blue 1, since it's very hard to win a lane against Ashe without support counterpick. By the end of the draft, GGS have a winning bottom lane, but Senna is unlikely to be enough to solo carry the game, and a hard losing top matchup, and a mid lane that needs to snowball to win laning phase. They are clearly on a timer, and their angle of attack is very telegraphed with Karma on 5, and telegraphed engage is pretty bad into Bard in teamfights, although there's not much of a better option for support. Senna Karma does at least beat Ashe Bard in the laning phase. Additionally, GGS have flexed the Ziggs to support before, so picking Ziggs on 3 doesn't necessarily lock GGS into having a Ziggs middle lane if they do want to swap something up for the mid-jungle 2v2 later on in the draft. From TSM's perspective, I would have preferred to see an Ashe first pick, as there's not a whole lot left that can effectively deal with it from an AD carry perspective. Ezreal can concede lane and play safe, but GGS has preferred to play through bottom lane in the latter half of the split and throughout playoffs. FBI hasn't been known to play anything like the Ziggs. Jhin is up, but FBI would have been off a strong high damage teamfight AD carry. This is similar to Senna, which we saw play out in this game anyway. Additionally, I think that it might have been better to pick a different champion on 3 than Azir, since they're obviously trying to hold the 3-way flex with Set. Twisted Fate functions great with Ashe. If GGS counter with Sylas or Galio, their angle of attack is exposed, and they're locked into a short-range composition, and TSM would just have to pick a high-damage top laner who excels at fighting in close range, which is what Broken Blade stylistically excels at anyway. I primarily say this because I see Blind Pick Azir as being way more exploitable than Blind Pick Twisted Fate. Level 1 is pretty interesting. TSM clearly have the better level 1, and I would have liked to see TSM invade for vision on the bottom side. The only risk would be Echo starting W with GGS on a stack into a multi-man stun against TSM stack, but looking at the compositions, it's not really relevant since Damonte would lose lane really hard for it, and TSM would just have to avoid stacking for the stun. Invading for a ward on the enemy blue buff would be especially effective since TSM has the opportunity to get priority in both mid and top lane, so Spica would have free reign of Closer's topside if they can gain knowledge of Closer's path early. Broken Blade pulling the wave early is extremely strong, and it'll really screw over Haunter if Spica ganks top early once this wave slow pushes and stacks onto Broken Blade if he can resist the urge to push the wave. I'm expecting a 320 gank from Spica after a 4 camp. If Haunter dies, the game is over because Broken Blade can roll over the entire enemy topside on Jax. This gank would be especially effective if TSM were to ward the enemy blue buff like previously mentioned. If Closer had done a leashless, Broken Blade wouldn't really be capable of pulling this wave, and TSM wouldn't know if Closer could counter the 320 gank on top lane since Mordekaiser is likely to push the lane early anyway. Either way, a pretty big mistake from both teams, but this game is really free for TSM if they can execute this top gank properly. Unfortunately, Broken Blade gets rash and trades a lot early. I think this was really unnecessary. TSM knew where Closer started. He's obviously on top side right now since he got a leash from Haunter. If Broken Blade had some patience and forced Haunter to push into him, he could have zoned Haunter off so much XP when Spica was topside. Also, I think Spica should have just done his blue buff and let top wave push closer to Broken Blade's tower. He sort of came too early when a dive is impossible this early, especially since Echo has teleport, so if they screw up the dive even a little, Damonte can come and achieve some sort of trade. After clearing most of his bottom side, I think it's really funny Closer came back topside here. Since GGS saw Spica on a top ward and knew how much CS Spica had, Closer could have just taken enemy Krugs into bottom scuttle and looked to either gank mid since Bjergsen was slow pushing a wave onto Damonte's tower, or Closer just could have taken Spica's second Raptor spawn, and he would have been much closer to level 6. Just looking by the champions that were drafted, Closer obviously doesn't win this 2v2 on top side. Jax is simply too good into both of the champions that GGS have drafted. And if Closer can pressure mid lane effectively versus Bjergsen's Azir, Damonte's Echo will have kill pressure in this matchup. GGS's bottom mid hitting 6 first is very important because their win condition is successfully diving TSM's bottom side. Even if by some absolute stroke of luck this top lane gank did work, it really doesn't matter much since Jax just wins this matchup anyway, and Wit's End is absurdly OP here for Jax if he falls behind. In conclusion, I think Closer should have done a leashless to hide his path, and Broken Blade couldn't have pulled the wave if he did do a leashless. TSM could have invaded level 1 on bottom side in order to reveal Closer's path in case he did do a leashless. Broken Blade had the correct idea to pull the wave. Spica was pathing top, and Broken Blade could have set Haunter super far behind by letting the wave slow push into him and freezing on Haunter under threat of Spica gank. Closer wants to hit 6 first by utilizing Volley's faster clear time early and dive bottom lane. He also wants to let Damonte hit 6 first and further utilize Echo to dive bottom lane. Both teams take missteps, but Closer circling back to top lane to try to relieve pressure on Haunter was the biggest mistake in my mind, because now GGS is now trying to counter TSM's win condition, as opposed to playing towards their own. Furthermore, Closer can likely take Spica's Raptor spawn before recalling, pathing towards bottom lane, hitting 6, and then trying to dive bottom lane with Damonte after he also recalls, or just baiting enemy TPs and trying again later. One final nitpick, and this one's pretty obvious. Spica forcing this gank is really bad. He should have just helped Broken Blade crash this wave, and Broken Blade can recall and save teleport. Golden Guardians' only win condition is to snowball a different lane, so if Broken Blade saves teleport, their win condition is kaput. There's more I could talk about, but these are the most important points I wanted to hit on. It's clear TSM in this instance don't have a super clear early game plan beyond snowball top lane. They aren't recognizing the conditions for snowballing top lane effectively. For the final section of this analysis, I want to focus on objective setups and the resulting team fights and skirmishes. On the first Dragon setup, Closer gets a bit of a later recall relative to Spica. Spica gets on Dragon first, since TSM has a ward on Krugs and spots out Closer, so the Drake is free. Bjergsen drops the wave mid to recall and teleports, having burned Damonte's earlier. I'm not super sure why Damonte teleported here. He definitely could have saved it and maybe sacked a wave. Huhi roaming up forfeits bottom lane priority, so GGS have priority in neither lane proximal to Dragon. In my mind, if GGS either just made Damonte TP and Closer come down to Dragon immediately, they'd get first Dragon while Huhi rotated to lane from mid for bottom priority, or if Huhi and Closer held mid lane while Damonte walks back, they'd keep the option for mid lane priority, and maybe force Bjergsen's base and teleport for item advantage in the prospective fight. They would still lose the Dragon, but Damonte would keep teleport in this instance, so they would have the option to make a play later on. They choose the worst possible option though, and Spica takes Dragon since Closer agrees for Scuttle when this is fightable, and relatively necessary since TSM will outscale GGS. Another option, perhaps unrelated to the Dragon Closer had, would have just been to path from bottom side and tried for a fast play with level 6, since Closer got his first Krugs, and GGS knew Spica didn't get his first Krugs. Closer has the XP lead. GGS with TSM double proximal lane priority should expect TSM to have vision on their top side, so Closer going top side generally is quite greedy. Point to TSM though, they did a good job of setting up vision on the top side early using that priority, and Bjergsen did a good job of holding his teleport. The only slight I have is if Broken Blade had saved his teleport, GGS never would have even had the opportunity to take this Dragon, no matter what they did. Later on, during the second Dragon setup, TSM putting their Herald on bottom lane is perhaps the worst place they could have put it on the map. Mid lane is an obvious candidate since it's the best to take early, and since the lane is so short, there's no true disadvantage to taking it early, as freezes can be dislodged with ease throughout the game. Leading up to this play though, Spica does something extremely weird. I speculate that he was keeping his camps up on the bottom side in order to allow his laners to farm them, but the consequences of this is he reaches top side way too early. The ideal candidate for this Herald was top lane. It's not as good as mid, but it lets TSM get the second Dragon for free, which puts a lot of pressure on GGS to take very risky fights. If Spica came top slightly later here, dropped Herald pretty shallowly in the lane, and then recalled, the Herald would have approached the tower right as Drake spawned, and Haunter would have a very hard time deciding between giving an upwards of 560 gold to TSM in plates for free, or fighting for second Dragon. The best option for TSM to drop this Herald mid lane would have been to sync up Bjergsen and Spica's recalls. Bjergsen would have had to sack the wave, or better yet, Spica should have just leashed the blue buff for Bjergsen while he was clearing this mid wave. Bjergsen could have come over to last hit the buff. He could have channeled recall while Spica finished up his Gromp, and then Spica uses the empowered recall to get on the map faster. Either of these would have worked. Once Bjergsen and Spica were on the map, having coordinated their recalls, they would have been on the map way faster and either denied Damonte's recall or forced his teleport onto mid lane to defend his tower since TSM had tempo and could have dropped Rift Herald. This is the ideal play in this scenario, since TSM's bottom lane is so far behind, since GGS simply have the winning bottom lane matchup. Putting it top lane can help further snowball Jax, but putting it mid would have made more geographic sense in the way TSM want to play the map. Take your pick. Putting it bottom lane was rushed, and TSM should have had timer on Damonte's TP, and Damonte shows up with the Protobelt spike. TSM knew Damonte wanted to recall, and GGS's bottom lane was already stronger with Senna already having Manamune versus Doublelift just having Vampiric Scepter. One final thing I want to bring up about this play is the fact that even if TSM did absolutely nothing, although not ideal, would have been a better idea than just forcing a rushed play on bottom side while down in tempo. TSM could have just traded vertically and put Herald top while warding closers topside, and taking the camps he left while GGS were on the dragon. After this, a few silly mechanical mistakes happen. Damonte misclicks the Bard portal, who he gets caught while greeting for poke, but the next real issue I perceive happens around 20 minutes, and this one is a really obvious one. Bjergsen pushing the bottom wave is a massive mistake, and it causes him to need to run all the way up to the middle of bottom lane to fully crash the wave in. I can't see all of the minions or how this actual wave works, but it's clear by Bjergsen's mana bar that he's actively pushing this wave as opposed to freezing it. Bjergsen can either slow push this wave and sync it up with top wave in case GGS tries to hard engage on Broken Blade and TP over, or he can just hold this wave in a freeze pretty much indefinitely, and GGS will have to dive Bjergsen, committing a ton of time and resources towards killing him if they even manage to do that, and TSM would just take the Baron. Bjergsen has multiple options depending on how this wave actually looks, but he chose the worst option by far by fast pushing this wave and then trying to crash it. In addition, I don't think it's the best move, but it's an option that Bjergsen also had. If he absolutely had to, he could have just relinked with his team without expending teleport, even after he screwed up the bottom wave, farming jungle camps on the way up, and TSM could have just started playing 2 lanes, and if they did fight, it wouldn't be a terrible fight, but it wouldn't be super ideal, since GGS, despite being down in gold, aren't actually that far behind realistically, since their items are so much cheaper than TSM's, and they're currently on those items. It should be noted that these fights are way easier to execute for TSM though. Either way, Bjergsen exercised bad judgment here several times. At 23 minutes, as 4th dragon is spawning, something similar happens where Bjergsen again gets caught in the bottom lane. However, I perceive this one as more of an error in communication as opposed to an error in judgment. TSM is trying to get priority in 2 lanes before dragon spawns, but Spica and Biofrost are hovering for Doublelift as opposed to Bjergsen. Doublelift is way safer in the mid lane, the outer tower being up is indicative of this. He's unlikely to be caught out by a teleport. In addition, Broken Blade is entering the map through the middle lane to facilitate Doublelift's rotation onto dragon. Spica and Biofrost should have broken the plant and moved to support Bjergsen. They were already seen by the Vision plant, and it's extremely obvious that GGS's only play is to couch out Bjergsen fast. It's sort of Bjergsen's fault, but someone needs to be communicating this information in advance, whether enemy has eyes on Spica and Bio, or that Spica and Bio aren't moving to Bjergsen. Realistically, if GGS really wanted Bjergsen dead, there was nothing that could realistically be done here unless he called Spica and Biofrost over in advance manually, but they should sort of know to do this thing innately. The chain of command is failing somewhere for TSM. After this, GGS rightfully take dragon to try to deny soul point. They overreach for Baron, but Damonte screws up. GGS know Spica just burned flash at Drake. They have the vision, so they don't need to run interference versus Spica like this. In any regard, it's probably better to take the 50-50 if it's absolutely necessary anyway, and it helps a little bit of luck falls the way of TSM too. The next fight needs little analysis. GGS have Baron, and it's their only real window to make a play before everything goes out the door and TSM fully outscales. Unfortunately for GGS, TSM is already on the spikes. Broken Blade has 2 items, Doublelift has 2 items, and Bjergsen has 3 items including a death cap. TSM stomps the fight and wins. GGS don't win the 5v5, they don't win the side lane versus Jax. The only real opportunity they had was to force on Bjergsen using Echo and take an objective off his death. If GGS had taken the Baron cleanly, it is perhaps likely that they would have been capable of snuffing TSM, but mechanical misplays and general indecision caused them to flub the play, give control of the game to TSM, which TSM promptly closed. In conclusion, I think a lot of TSM's issues heading into the later game are based on a failure of coordinating side waves. Jax is capable of beating both enemy solo laners and the side lane, but Bjergsen is vulnerable to Echo, especially if he's capable of collapsing with his team. Azir is a decent mid laner at side laning, but it is apparent that Bjergsen is not taking the necessary precautions to do so in many of these instances, and his team is slow to trade vertically on the opposite side of the map. GGS's mistakes are similar, while many of their ideas are good, such as recognizing the urgent need to pick off Bjergsen in the side lane. They are indecisive around objectives. All of these things are confounded by the fact that GGS faced more mechanical mistakes than TSM throughout the match, and they had a slight disadvantage in draft. Both teams had issues setting up early game objectives, but TSM especially so, since they had more options and opportunities to do so. This game should have been a clean victory for TSM following their advantage in draft phase and early game skirmishes, but they allowed GGS too much space which a better team could have utilized more effectively. Thank you for watching and your consideration. Just looking at the script, it's very likely for this video to run a little over my intended time, but that's no matter. I think I touched on most of the important points I saw from this VOD, and I'm excited to hear back from you guys. But even if I am not selected to proceed, I think this will make an interesting YouTube video to post later on. Have a nice day.